As I booted up the Demon's Souls remake and looked over all the class options, a feeling of indecision washed over me. It was the Souls game that I had spent the least amount of time with, but I still wanted a fresh experience. I wanted to build a character in a way that I hadn't before, and adopt a playstyle that was new to me. But how do I go about doing that? Should I focus on a new weapon type? Should I put all my soul levels into luck? Well, perhaps I should try a faith build, or maybe even a soul level 1 run could be rewarding. All of these thoughts poured through my mind as I pondered which route to take. But then I saw it. Oh, the royalty class starts with a catalyst and soul arrow. That could be pretty useful in the early game as I re-familiarize myself with this world. I mean, magic had always been useful in the Dark Souls series, so it wasn't hard to imagine the same being true here. Little did I know that this decision would mark the beginning of my journey down the path of least resistance. Instead of boldly going against the grain, I fell back into the routine that had allowed me to beat the original Demon's Souls for the first time back in 2017. That's right, by the time I lulled the old one back to slumber, I was set up with the Demon's Souls starter pack. The Cling Ring, the Regenerator Ring, Soul Arrows, the Enchanted Falchion, and of course, the Adjudicator Shield. It got me thinking about our tendency to fall back into the familiar, and how hard it is to explore new opportunities in life. Often, we as humans gravitate towards the path of least resistance, and that's what I want to talk a little bit about in this video. So today, in this episode of Psychology of Gaming, the series where we look at how psychological principles are worked into games, and how games can affect us psychologically, we take a look at some Souls games and how our tendency towards the path of least resistance can influence our experience. So, the path of least resistance. What is it? Well, to put it simply, it's our tendency to choose options that require the least amount of exertion, as well as pathways that will provide the lowest number of obstacles. The term is usually to be interpreted metaphorically and applies to our thinking patterns more so than our physical tendencies. Our brains are programmed for survival, and there's a sense of safety and comfort when we follow pathways that we've gone down before. Old ways of thinking and the habits that come along with them are reinforced, making us more likely to adopt those same strategies and thinking processes down the road when a similar occurrence takes place. In short, we're lazy. We stick to what we know, and we usually avoid taking risks, and more times than not, we play it safe. We tend to go with the flow, quite literally in some cases. In one psychological study, participants were asked simply to observe a computer screen with clouds on it moving from left to right or from right to left. Instead of saying which direction the clouds moved in, they were asked to move a mouse to indicate their thoughts. At first, every participant moved the mouse in the right direction, but eventually, the group behind the study triggered an alternate mode in the mouse, making it harder for it to move to the right. This was done subtly though, to ensure that the participants would remain rather unaware of the change. Eventually, some participants stuck so much to the path of least resistance that they ended up moving their mouse in the wrong direction. Even though their eyes were processing the same information, they picked up on the mouse's resistance subconsciously, and it influenced them to go the opposite way. It demonstrated how easily we can be manipulated without even being aware, but more importantly for this video, it showed that we tend to go with the flow, and choose paths that will require the least amount of effort, and also that includes the least amount of confrontation or obstacles. I mean, not to get meta or anything, but even I fell into this pattern when deciding to make this video. I knew I wanted to make a Psychology of Gaming episode. I mean, the last one was a few months ago at this point. And as I looked over my ideas list, I realized I do have other projects to work on. So what did I do? Well, I picked the subject that seemed like it would be the easiest to make, and I went from there. It's important for us to be aware of our own faults and limitations if we aim to grow, and one of the biggest pushes we can make towards that is becoming more self-aware of our own patterns. Patterns lead to comfort, but they also lead to stagnation, and overcoming that is one of the central parts of life. On a less serious note though, this tendency towards the path of least resistance also affects how we play games. It's why some people have trouble trying new builds in an RPG, or why some folks always play on the easy mode, or why some people play games with a guide so that they don't miss anything, or even why videos like this one have thousands and sometimes even hundreds of thousands of views. We want what's easy, and we want what we already know. So let's shift our focus onto two other From Software games, Dark Souls and Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and see how they take advantage of our tendency towards the familiar, but also how they challenge it. As I revisited the early stages of Dark Souls for this video, a few things jumped out to me. The game where you die a lot, as it's become known for, actually offers the player a lot of ways to ease the experience while also using smart level design to guide you naturally instead of telling you the exact route to take. For example, as soon as you make it to Lordran, the game offers up a lot of freedom for which path the player can take, especially if they have the Master Key. Experienced players can head out in any direction and tackle a multitude of bosses as their first major encounter. New players, however, will get a chance to stick their toes in the water, so to speak. They can also venture down those same pathways, but the developers trust the player's intelligence to recognize that these are routes they aren't equipped to tackle yet. Instead of getting wrecked by the graveyard skeletons over and over again, the game expects you to find the path of least resistance by venturing up to the Undead Burg, where the enemies are much easier to handle. If you don't take the ultimate path of least resistance by just turning the game off and never playing it again, then your next best option will be heading up towards the first Spell of Awakening. And all of this is done organically too, signaling a keen awareness for how the player's mind will work. And part of the brilliance in the world design of Dark Souls is the freedom that comes with it. You are encouraged to go one way, but you're not restricted to it. Meaning, if you want to challenge yourself to get better and overcome that tendency, then you can. And that's awesome. It's a great lesson about perseverance that can carry over into your everyday life. Dark Souls also has a lot of ways to make the experience easier, but they aren't telegraphed to the player. By not including obvious markers to signal items or playstyles that would ease the experience, the player is left to experiment and not just choose the easiest option because the game tells you what it is. For example, co-op summoning is a mechanic that a lot of players won't even realize exists until they look it up, and simultaneously, spells and pyromancy can greatly ease your journey, but only if you pick the right starting class or find the items in the world. On top of that, in the early game, much of these spells and pyromancies have limited usage, so you can't spam them throughout the level and also use them to dispatch a boss. What I'm trying to say is that these options to make the game easier exist, but they don't necessarily wreck a first playthrough by bombarding you with them and trivializing everything. Moving on. In 2019, From Software released Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, a game that truly challenges the player's tendency towards the path of least resistance. After experiencing the entirety of the Souls series and Bloodborne, this game took many of the habits that were reinforced in those games and made them less effective. Interestingly enough, most of the series' differences in terms of combat comes on the defensive side of tactics, not the offensive. Dark Souls reinforced blocking, but also incentivized parrying and dodge rolling. Bloodborne reinforced dodge rolling and disincentivized shield use. Sekiro took things a step further by disincentivizing dodge rolling and incentivizing deflections. Blocking and dodge rolling used to be enough to carry the day. It was easy to understand, and it was relatively easy to implement. Deflecting, on the other hand, was not. It took a lot more effort from the player to read enemy animations and react at the proper time, all while experiencing a game that played much faster than its oldest predecessor. If Dark Souls was a game about nudging the player into pushing against their own limitations, Sekiro was a game that demanded it. All those helpful tools that could lure players into a cheesing pattern were removed in Sekiro. At launch, there was no co-op, no magic, no overpowered gear, and the most reinforced defensive tactic, dodge rolling, was now often punished instead of being rewarded. By limiting these options, a lot more was expected from the player if they wanted to beat this title. Our previous paths of least resistance were limited, but upon closer inspection, they weren't eliminated. Never underestimate the power of the human brain to find ways to make difficult tasks easier. This was certainly a mental trapping that I fell into as I played through Sekiro for the first time. As I came face to face with a boss that seemed impossible, I fell back onto a tried and true strategy that eventually culminated in my success. And what might that be, you ask? Well, I ran away. That's right, I'd run around these open stadiums, letting the boss chase after me like a Scooby-Doo villain pursuing the gang. I'd bait out certain attacks that I learned how to dodge, and then get in a quick hit or two before running away. Instead of engaging with the posture bar mechanic like the game wanted me to, I kept my focus on the boss's health and whittled it down over time. I feel kinda shameful to admit it, but it's absolutely the truth. I beat the hardest bosses in the game using this strategy, and to me, it really showed me my tendency towards following the path of least resistance. I mean, it still took me 2 full days of attempts to beat Sword Saint, but when I did, I for sure had this lingering feeling that I hadn't gotten the full experience by playing this way. And I had a lot of conflicting feelings about the game because of this, but now I'm starting to understand why. Sekiro really challenged the patterns of behaviors that had allowed me to beat previous Souls games, and it led to a disconnect between what I expected from the game and what the game expected from me. And that's gotta be one of the most challenging things about creating a video game sequel: how to juggle player expectations and tendencies while also offering a fresh new experience. Onboarding the player into these new mechanics is vital, but there will always be players who are set in their ways and insist on finding ways to cheese encounters instead of learning the necessary skills to defeat bosses. At the end of the day, all the developers can do is build an experience that challenges the player and leaves it up to the person with the controller in their hands to determine how they want to play. People play games for different reasons. Some folks want the escapism of a good story without a ton of challenge to interrupt relaxation time. Yet, others will push themselves to their limits by doing challenge runs or speed runs. It's up to the individual to determine this for themselves, but to me, I've always had a great deal of respect for speedrunners who push themselves to be the very best they can at the game. It's clear these folks defy the path of least resistance and intend to master their craft. Regardless of how you play though, it's always good to recognize the patterns that we find ourselves falling into, as not addressing them can lead to stagnation and wasted potential. It's a good lesson to keep in mind for your day-to-day life, but when it comes to video games, well, just play how you want. With that being said though, don't be afraid to challenge yourself from time to time in every aspect of your life. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go beat Sword Saint the proper way. Hey everybody, that brings us to the end of this video. If you liked it and you want more Psychology of Gaming, be sure to check out the playlist, as it's now 41 episodes long. And if you want more Bloodborne, Dark Souls, or Sekiro content, be sure to check out some of the other episodes in the playlist, like Bloodborne and how the amygdala works in the game and how it works in our minds. Or check out this video about how our mental map of Lordran is formed as we play. And then there's also this little video here which I really loved making, more specifically about Sekiro and our tendency towards dodge rolling and how the game punished that to make us more likely to use the deflect system. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Please leave a like if you enjoyed it, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day, and take care.